Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Vital Psychedelic Conversations. Really, really excited to have Dr. Sam Gandy on the show today. Sam, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here. Good to be chatting to you again, Kyle.
Yeah, second time on the show. I guess for those that want to kind of dig a little bit more into your work, they can go back into our archive, and we can put a link in the show notes from our previous episode. But do you want to give like a short little brief info or bio about who you are and some of your work?
Sure. So yeah, just quickly. So yeah, my background is my kind of academic background is in ecology. And sort of, I guess, more recently, in more recent years, I've kind of veered more into sort of doing a bit of psychedelic research. So I was scientific assistant to the director of the Beckley Foundation for a time. I was a research associate with Synthesis Institute, which is a kind of psilocybin retreat center in the Netherlands, and a senior science writer with Wave Paths, which uses music as an experiential therapy modality, and it's kind of a spin-off of the psychedelic research conducted by Imperial College here in the UK. And I'm also an external collaborator with Imperial, and my, I guess, research interest is centered on the capacity of psychedelics to influence people's feelings towards or relationship with nature.
I love it. I'm so glad you're covering that topic. I feel like it's such a huge and important topic to explore.
I think so too. I'm quite happy to sort of be kind of helping sow the seeds of it a bit and seeing it start to sort of grow a bit now, and it seems to sort of resonate with quite a few people, and it's nice to see.
Yeah. All right, so we've been kicking these conversations off with a question, and that question is, what do you think is the most vital psychedelic conversation people should be having right now?
I think quite possibly, like, how do we maximize the benefits of psychedelics? And that's quite an expansive kind of answer, in the sense that, there's the individual. There's the sort of on the individual level, there could be ways of maximizing the therapeutic potential or the mental health gains one can hope to obtain from psychedelics. It can, as mentioned, maybe it's my slight bias, my research interest, kind of the implications for shifting people's relationship to nature at this time we find ourselves in, like where we're orchestrating a mass extinction event and we're seeming to become ever more disconnected from nature. And then also, can psychedelics be used intentionally as creativity enhancing agents, or in some way? And if they could be, there's potential kind of quite wide, society level benefits potentially. I mean, that's kind of a bit of a reach, but in principle, like, it's feasible. That there's sort of psychedelics have been important for certain. They have helped facilitate some scientific insights and progress, particularly in the field of computing and things like this. So, obviously, the mental health potential of psychedelics is very much the sort of, I guess, the key focus going on now, at least in scientific clinical circles. And that's great. And, we really need some new treatments and therapies to combat intractable, hard to treat conditions like PTSD and major depression and addiction. So that's all, and existential anxiety as well. So all these things, their mainstream treatments fall well short, essentially, and psychedelics are showing promise, and that's all great, and that's important, commendable work, absolutely. But I sort of, I guess my interest looking ahead is, what about the betterment of well people, as Bob Jesse would put it. And I would like to see sort of, more attention and focus being sort of devoted to that, because I feel like there are, potential important benefits there that could perhaps even go beyond the individual. So I think that's an important area that needs some attention.
I think so too. Yeah, and I always come back to something. Our teacher Lenny was having a conversation with Stan, and when the research was really kind of Stan Groff for those. And it was just kind of saying, isn't this great? Like all the research is starting to take off again. And Stan's response was like, a lot of the stuff in the psychological realm has been done before, maybe not to the certain degree of what science is now with double-blind studies and the rigor behind it. But a comment that he made was, I think the real implication here at times is within the realm of creativity. And we just recorded with him and Brigitte a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago at this point. And yeah, he did circle back to that aspect of creativity, which I think is important. And coming from the ecological point of view, like I think we need new creative and novel ideas to help combat some of the stuff that we're going to be battling up against.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I mean, that's actually like I've kind of written a review paper sort of looking at this recently, and that's kind of one of my concluding remarks actually. And I think it's the saying of Terence McKenna's. Obviously he had many quotable sound bites, but one of them is like, if you can do one thing in the psychedelic space, bring back a new idea, because we are a species or a civilization like in desperate need of new ideas, and particularly in the coming decades we're going to face immense challenges as a civilization, as a species. There's no getting away from that. So if we can leverage any sort of create any potential for garnering creative insight and new perspectives on problems, then that really, I think, deserves to be explored. And we'd be foolish not to, I think.
Yeah, I think even like when we were chatting before we got recording here, you said you're starting to make a shift in some of your work, and you're talking about how trying to restore water, right? Streams, ponds, and et cetera, and how that's been really destroyed where you live in the UK. And just thinking about fresh water, the environments, the biodiversity in there, like what happens when that is destroyed? It's things that we probably don't think about very often. Maybe we're thinking about other things, but yeah, it's like what type of huge implication does that have if we do destroy those, parts of our environment?
I feel like my first love, I guess, is nature, and then ecology kind of followed on from that, sort of, I guess, academically when I got older. But I feel like our ways of sort of the way we place value on things is skewed. We have an extractive model where we value the produce that nature can sort of provide us, but we don't particularly value the underlying, I guess, ecosystem services and like things like clean fresh water and clean air and biodiversity and stuff. These don't really people have tried to assign a pound or dollar value to these things, but they don't tend to sort of get sort of the attention that they deserve. I don't know where else.
No, all good. I want to come back to your answer around, how do we maximize the benefit of psychedelics? And I wonder, do you have any insight around that? Like, how do we do that? Is it in the container that we're creating for the actual experience? How we're setting that up? Is it in the integration?
I think it's all of those things and perhaps more. Firstly, just sort of like, I don't believe that there's one sort of fixed way of using psychedelics well. I think there's different contexts and situations where they can be used very well depending on the purpose and intent. So we've got the clinical model where it's a nice, secure, safe setting. People wearing eye shades, headphones. They've been primed to sort of, they're lying down on a sofa or a bed, and they've been sort of primed and instructed to go inwards, essentially. So it's a super absorbed kind of inner experience, and that works. We know it works because there's good scientific data to show it works. In terms of like going inwards and doing some kind of psychological spring cleaning, I guess, for certain mental health conditions, and that's great. But But then there's the sort of case, well, what about if we kind of brought more nature into the context, not necessarily in the acute session itself, but perhaps, but on either side as part of the preparation integration. The preliminary research that's been done suggests that psychedelics can influence people's relationship with nature, their connection to it, and that has really important implications for people's mental health and well-being. Nature contact is a hugely underutilized and undervalued mental health intervention or sort of buffer. There was a study trying to estimate the global value of protected areas to the mental health of visitors, and it came out at around $12 trillion per year in terms of mental health benefits on a global scale. And then, of course, and then another way of using psychedelics I think is quite interesting is as creativity enhancing agents, and that calls for an entirely different approach where you don't use the high doses that you would in a clinical session. They're probably too big. They can kind of cause a little bit of some kind of deficits in cognitive processing, like the really high doses of psychedelics, and also probably a bit too distracting as well. But if you have a slightly lower dose, and particularly if you're stuck on a creative problem that's occupied your waking life for a certain amount of time, that you've grappled with and you can't quite sort of get past it or through it, something you're deeply emotionally engaged with and involved with as well, it seems that psychedelic could be could play a role there perhaps, and be helpful there. But so and that's kind of like three very different sort of contexts and sort of approaches there that are sort of essentially geared up to have very different outcomes. Of like a clinical mental health intervention, a way of fostering, deepening or renewing or igniting a deepened connection to nature, and then the applied use of psychedelics as a creativity enhancing or perspective altering agent. So, and I'm sure that there's many other ways as well. This is just, I guess, three sort of like major, and then of course there is the indigenous, of course I've got to give the shout out that the indigenous context deserves as well, in terms of like thinking to ayahuasca in the Peruvian Amazon. So I'm doing a evolve of a study there looking at nature relatedness, and a nice thing about that sort of context is, as well as obviously the nature rich environment of the Amazon rainforest, is that it's the social connectedness that can come out of having a shared experience with a group of other people. And I feel like that is an important thing that's maybe not really, and it's starting now to be discussed in clinical circles, the potential benefits of having group therapy, at least either side of a psychedelic session. And some people are making the case for, well, what about the actual acute experience itself? So, and I think having a profound experience like that and shared with others, that can maybe be powerful kind of on its own, because it seems that psychedelics, we know from the research that they can enhance psychological connectedness to self, to others, and to world at large. And that's important. Humans are wired for connection. We are a social, connected species, and that's sort of that's a very ancient thing. That sort of almost in some sense predates us as a modern human species, whereas we've kind of, I guess, slightly repressed that in terms of our society sort of maybe doesn't value those things and is more focused on material, technological, individualistic, consumerist sort of values, and it's pushed those to the back a bit. So it seems that psychedelics are amplifiers or catalysts of connection. So obviously, with that in mind, the context in which they are used is then hugely important for sort of the outcomes if you're interested in cultivating that. And that seems to be a worthwhile thing to cultivate, because low levels of connectedness are correlated with mental health issues such as depression. Social connectedness is one of the most powerful buffers against depression. So yeah, I feel like more attention needs to be given now. Like, rather than designing new analogues of psychedelics, it's not, people are getting maybe slightly focusing too much on the chemical substances themselves.
Right.
When the context around those, the usage of those chemicals is probably much more important and in need of much more attention, I think. And I feel like more exploration there could sort of enhance the potential benefits of psychedelics in a variety of different ways as well.
Yeah. There's so many different things I want to ask right now, but I guess I'll just follow up here with the social connectedness. And I think, one thing for me at least, like just the past 2 years with COVID being, luckily I've been around family and been able to have interactions. But I can't imagine the isolation that some people have been feeling, and just how important connection and community is. And we're social beings. And it makes me think around, one context that, not everybody talks about within, the psychedelic therapy space, because it feels maybe a little taboo, but, the festival scene, like what type of connectedness happens there when people come together for music and they're using substances. And, that was never really my world, but being able to talk to people over the past few years with this project and hearing all the different kind of experiences people have had. I've always been on, it needs to be done in a certain container and this and that, and trying to have an open mind around it and say, wow, actually people are connecting, and, it kind of turns into like their families. They're traveling around the country on all these music festivals, and how beneficial could that be for people's mental health?
I mean, it's a good point. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit outside the I'm a bit of an outlier and a kind of an external collaborator. But if I was a kind of mainstream clinical psychedelic person now, I'd be going, well, no, because there's all the risk.
I'm the same way. I'm like, the harms, like, yeah, of course.
So, but with that with that said, like, I feel like that is another way in which psychedelics can be or are used, and potentially beneficially in some cases. A scientific, colleague, Matthias Forsman, did an interesting, study over a few years while he was based at Yale, I think, and he kind of went with his sort of collaborators to a few different festivals in the US, and he kind of he handed out some surveys and tried to get data on people using psychedelics and other substances actually in the festival setting. And what he found was people were reporting long-term enhancements in social connectedness, actually, in particular, and mediated through two different things. I think so. People were having these transformative, transcendental peak experiences, which were important, but then also connecting with friends and loved ones. And so it's sort of like, obviously in a clinical scenario, there is preparation that obviously goes into a psychedelic session, and the person having the psychedelic session will meet with their therapist, usually two, male and female therapists, and kind of speak to them about personal stuff, about what they hope to gain from the session, a bit about their background, and build up a bit of trust and rapport. And that's really important at sort of predicting, sort of allowing people to surrender and let go, which is when important shifts can happen, comes through that sense of trust and the security that stems from it. But it seems like in a naturalistic festival scenario, it's like the friends and loved ones feel that niche, because even the therapist-patient relationship it's that bond is very similar to a kind of interpersonal relationship bond. So it's like the loved ones in that scenario kind of fill the niche of the therapist to some degree.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I also wonder, for those that in the psychotherapy world, as I've been really kind of on the container, like, how many of you have been to Burning Man, and does that keep drawing you back there, right? And what are your experiences like there? So I've had to have a little bit more of an open mind, because I never really kind of came from the music festival world. And, it's been interesting just to hear more people's experiences. There. I want to ask you too, in some of your research with psychedelics and nature interconnectedness, did you, ask any questions, people just naturally having nature experiences? Like, how often does this interconnectedness with nature come up in psychedelic experiences if they're not out in nature? I'm just thinking, like, I've had plenty of experiences where it's like it always comes back to nature to some degree. I'm like, I should think about, like, the planet in a different way. I want to take care of this a little bit different way. But I wonder, like, how core is that to the psychedelic experience for some people? And I don't know if you have that research or whatnot.
I mean, it seems to be fair. I mean, sometimes when, I guess, stories covering the research, the nature connectedness psychedelic research gets shared, like, most people are really like, positive about it, but some people are like, almost like, oh, come on, like, duh, of course, it's like almost a cliche that psychedelics enhance one's feelings towards nature, because it's just considered like so common. I mean, David Luke, my friend and colleague, he did the kind of first survey study that I became aware of that really got me interested in this whole area, actually, looking at how psychedelics influence people's connection to nature and their pro-ecological concern. And what was interesting is he had a sample, I think, of 150 people in his survey sample, and every single person, 100% of people, said they'd become more connected, or felt more connected to nature as a result of their experiences. And you rarely find results that sort of strong in psychology. It's quite unusual. So, and we're actually collaborating now on his with him and his Ph.D. student Alex Irvine. They're doing a really interesting qualitative paper. So we've quite a good sample size, and like we're surveying people to find out, like, it's all very well having a sort of trying to kind of detect people's shift in relationship with nature on a nature relatedness or nature connectedness scale. People fill out this scale, and like they answer questions and they answer on a sliding scale, and that's good. That provides solid data, but it doesn't answer like why and how is your connection to or relationship with nature changing. And what's really kind of exciting about the qualitative research is it does. It leaves the human element intact and kind of honours it. And so you get this depth and resolution that's just not possible, really, from quantitative scales. And that's been really interesting to see the different sort of things at play there. So one of the core things is the experience of interconnectedness. And it's interesting because this experience is obviously, again, it's almost a cliche psychedelic term, sort of interconnectedness, but it's very much fundamental to the psychedelic experience, the mystical experience, both with and without psychedelics, the near-death experience, the out-of-body experience, the overview effect that the astronauts experience, some of them seeing the planet from space, and alien abduction experiences. And in all of these things, it seems to be a common mediator that can provoke pro-environmental, pro-ecological concern. And certainly in the sort of, the sample that we looked at, it seemed to be a particularly important mediator of this shift in relationship with nature. And as well, it was interesting. People using psychedelics in nature was also quite common. So some people intentionally did this as part of their kind of, I guess, their relationship with nature. Some people did it because they preferred having psychedelic experiences in nature to begin with. They find it a more soothing setting. And some people actually use nature as a kind of buffer. If they were having challenging experiences or something like that, they would self-soothe in nature. So it was interesting to see the different ways in which the nature-based setting was interacting with people and their experiences.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. I'm just, as you're talking, I'm trying to examine some of my experiences and thinking like, am I a little biased? Because I pretty much, I kind of grew up in the country and was always outside.
Same.
And I've always felt very connected
Same.
to the land.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm wondering for other people that maybe didn't have that, like, grew up in the city environment, do they...
It's an interesting point, definitely. So this is, I don't know how much I can say this because it's still in the pipeline, this study, but I think I can give kind of a broad overview. And it is really an interesting paper. But we found sort of, so definitely psychedelics can, they've been termed by Stan Groff as non-specific psychic amplifiers, and certainly we found that the amplification or magnification of people's pre-existing relationships to connection to nature was an important part of the story. If you had a existing relationship, it was going to probably be enhanced. But psychedelics could also kindle this sense of kinship with nature in those who hadn't really had or described a pre-existing profound relationship with nature or connection to it. So it seems it can both amplify and ignite relationships with nature, which is interesting. And just anecdotally, when I've done some talks and events and stuff, I've had people come up to me and say, I didn't have any particular, nature wasn't really a big part of my life at all prior to my first psychedelic experience, but now I want to do more, I want to know more involving it. I know someone fairly sort of prominent figure in the UK psychedelic movement, and she was a content and happy urbanite before her first psychedelic experience, and that sort of completely she sort of left her job, whatever she was doing then. She went and did a master's degree in ethnobotany, and then started to sort of do a bit of work on ibogaine and cannabis and different psychedelics, and was involved with the Beckley as well. So and that was interesting, particularly because she wasn't aware of that anything was missing from her life, and she was happy and content with her life as it was then. But still, there was this kind of radical shift that sort of catalyzed profound life change. Like, the trajectory of one's life was forever shifted. So they can potentially be quite deeply impactful. And David Luke found this in his sample, that in a certain proportion, I can't remember if was it 13% of his sample that I mentioned earlier of the 150, they went on to actually change careers as a result of being more connected to nature. They wanted to sort of do work that was more, had a lower environmental footprint, or was more sort of proactively ecological. I think 3 people even went on to pursue PhDs in botany because of their experiences. Oh wow! So it's interesting to kind of see how these shifts in people's relationship with nature can then be expressed and result in potentially behavioural change and lifestyle change in a big way sometimes. Yeah,
it's super interesting. I'm wondering from like the psychedelic psychotherapy world, like I always think like I would never want to do like a psychedelic therapy treatment in the city. I mean, that's just like a not an environment I'm used to. Like I said, like I kind of grew up in the country a little bit and always lived in like smaller towns, so I feel comfortable there. But it makes me wonder about like how can like therapy centers maybe create some sort of like nature within their treatment. It makes me think, like I think I was reading in Stan Grof's LSD psychotherapy, the hospital that they were working with over in Prague, they were allowed to take patients outside towards the end of their experience to feel that connectedness with nature, to get a little bit grounded. And I don't think not everybody's maybe thinking about like how can we involve nature into therapy here?
That's a good question. So, I mean, one kind of potential way of starting to do that maybe doesn't require a massive overhaul is incorporating more biophilic design into structures that are hosting people that are having psychedelic experiences. So, nature is powerful and potent in its sort of mental health boosting effects. Like, it doesn't even need to be real nature. I mean, simply looking at photographs or nature-based artwork can be soothing. And same with watching nature documentaries as well. That has mental health benefits. It's been shown. So yeah, you don't even need the real thing for it to positively affect you. So I feel like imbuing, kind of using nature-based, imbuing nature themed or inspired design into structures. The potential as well of using VR. And using like VR as a form of nature immersion that sort of obviously keeps things, if it's a clinical setting and everything needs to be clean and risk free, it's a way of maybe bringing sort of nature in a sort of safe and controlled way. And then as Stan Grof mentioned as well, just even like a little. Even some, having some plants inside. If you think about it, it's strange that some of us we live in these walls with a roof over our head, and we kind of shut out nature. It's something that's out there, and we live in these isolated bubbles. And if you think about it, that's quite odd, because for almost like 99.99% of our existence as a species, we've not lived like that. We've lived with sort of nature in nature and around nature. And so just incorporating just some plants and some nature into your inside habitats. And then if you can have even just a little a small garden, or just a terrace, or somewhere where there's some plants and stuff that people can go in, and maybe some running water, something like that. So I feel like there are a few different ways of kind of levering in nature, depending on resources and sort of feasibility, I guess, on context. But there are a few different ways you could kind of incorporate some nature, I think, if there's not a lot just at your fingertips.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for that. And it makes me, when you said we kind of like isolate ourselves in these little boxes and push the, nature outside, it makes me even think about like, how does that maybe make us afraid of nature at times, right? Like, like it's, I don't know if it's safe out there, right? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So biophobia, so the fear of nature, is one of the big barriers from preventing people from connecting to nature. And often these fears are largely baseless. Like, obviously, there are things that can sting us and bite us and such, but like most of apart from obviously mosquitoes are pretty annoying, but a lot of the dangerous stingy bitey things aren't particularly out to get you. But there's sort of nature does sort of generate sometimes nature generates like rational fear. Let's not, nature can be pretty feisty and deadly at times. So there's no denying it. But I think a lot of the time, fears around nature and other life forms are kind of largely unnecessary and baseless and restrictive. So, and I feel like a little bit of education there can sort of really help people, kind of maybe overcome that, and a bit of
You're just talking about kind of like the dangers of nature, and I recently just came across this Instagram account. I think it's like Nature is Metal, and it is pretty gruesome. Made me realize, oh man, I'm glad I'm not an animal or anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the natural environment is pretty intense.
Oh no. Well, that's there's no denying. Like, we live largely safe and secure lives, and nature can be, but it's weird. It's a funny one. Like, both sustains us and provides all that we need to exist, but in some respects is also trying to get us as well. But
I think it just helps to show the circle of life too.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's.
Yeah.
I'm curious to kind of go back to psychedelics and scientific creativity and insight. And you said you kind of did a review on that. I wonder, are you really kind of following Fadiman's research from the '60s when it comes to that?
I am actually. So, well, that was, I think, Fadiman's and Willis Harman's sort of study that they did. I mean, it wasn't just a study, actually. It was kind of a research program they were doing, I think. And then it kind of eventually was shut down by the FDA. It was one of the last...
I think they got the letter in during the last
I
session.
think so. I remember that. They got the letter, like, you must cease and desist, while the scientists and engineers there were tripping. It's like, we'll put that in the drawer and worry about that tomorrow. That was a kind of I guess a key inspiration and foundation of this paper, actually. Just trying to sort of there's been a bit more. There's now been a little bit more research looking at psychedelics and sort of various aspects of creativity, to sort of to build on that good work that was done. But that was a particularly interesting study in that it sort of used a sample of creatives, so architects and engineers, mathematicians, scientists, who were all working on particular creative problems. Often, they'd been working on it for quite some time, or they had multiple different things they were working on. They might have a creative block and they can't get past. So they were actively emotionally engaged and had a genuine problem that they wanted to solve. So it wasn't some kind of like abstract puzzle or something like that. It was a real world applied problem. And obviously, there's some issues with the study design. It wasn't controlled, but the overall findings, I feel, are still quite compelling. Like, quite a number of these scientific creatives had important breakthroughs or important sort of avenues to other things were sort of opened up. They did a kind of, and what was interesting was they did a qualitative assessment of, I think, half the people, sort of like 6 to 8 weeks later. And again, what's nice with the qualitative approach is you get this kind of like well-rounded overview. If you try and assess creativity, which is not an easy thing to measure or define, actually. Yeah,
like, what is creativity?
I should probably do that, actually, before I kind of ramble on any more. So, I guess a few different kind of researchers and scientists have kind of converged on a definition of creativity, particularly in a scientific context, of being the production or generation of useful novelty. So something that's new. It isn't, directly sort of like copying ideas, concepts, theories that have come before, and it's also useful in some way. And what they found with this qualitative survey they did of these study participants was that there was a whole entourage effect that the psychedelics were sort of bringing about. They weren't just like, they weren't just changing divergent or convergent thinking, which is like one of the kind of, I guess, more commonly assessed forms of creative thinking, those two modes of thinking. Like, there were other things going on. So people's inhibitions were lowered. So people had less fear of making mistakes and more sort of, I guess, inner courage to sort of pursue avenues they might not otherwise. They had greater access to their subconscious. They had more empathy with other people that were around them. Their visualization capacity was enhanced, so they could see what it was they were working on. In some cases, they became what they were working on and sort of saw it from a whole different perspective. So yeah, there's this whole synergy of all these different things happening in unison. And if you just try to measure what was going on for those scientists by applying a psychometric scale to assess creative thinking, you'd have missed all of that. So yeah, I feel like that's sort of, yeah, it's important to sort of like not be too limited in how we try and assess and measure creativity. And then also, if you can apply it to real world examples, that sort of, yeah, that kind of brings it up another notch as well. But what they found was it wasn't just the experience itself that was useful. About half the participants that were interviewed sort of 6 to 8 weeks later reported that they'd had enduring benefits to their cognition and their work performance that had sort of remained post experience. And you know, they had 200 milligrams of mescaline was the dose used in this particular study, so it wasn't a particularly big dose of psychedelic. Interestingly, they'd been primed, so they'd been told, like, you will not be distracted by the psychedelic, your creative faculties will be enhanced, and you won't get distracted by personal issues or personal emotive issues, so you'll be able to focus on the task or tasks in hand. And that's really interesting, because obviously directive priming is not looked on well in the modern sort of psychedelic renaissance in its clinical use.
Right.
Like it's a taboo, don't go there. But this study kind of makes an interesting case, and it's like, well, if the directive priming is done kind of, you know, benevolently, and it, you know, it's hard to say how important that was for the outcomes of the study, but it seems to have been a factor, and I suspect quite an important factor of the sort of beneficial outcomes. Like, you know, perhaps there's a case to be made there. Yeah,
it makes me wonder, I guess, just about like intention setting. And really kind of creating that intention going into the session. It makes me wonder too, I mean, like, how do you tell people not to like focus on any sort of personal stuff that I wonder if they had people in the room, like if it did come up, to help them refocus and say, no, let's shift away from that and
again, it's else. The context is really important. So no, they did that. People did have, I think, like 20, maybe like up to a quarter of people did kind of get distracted and sidetracked by personal emotive issues that came up. But it's interesting. I think I wonder to like how maybe working through some of that would actually help to get past any sort of blocks, like to be able to like maybe break some sort of ruminative cycle around a personal issue potentially. I mean, you know, in an ideal, I guess, scenario, well, perhaps not ideal, but one scenario would be you'd be allowed to have kind of multiple sessions. So perhaps if people did have like personal stuff that demanded their attention, they could kind of work through that and then sort of move on to their creative tasks, perhaps. But yeah, and obviously that's a kind of, again, it's a different setting and context where, you know, you're using lower doses. It's a relaxed atmosphere. Like the clinical setting wouldn't be appropriate there. It needs to be relaxed, and so, you know, a nice sort of cozy, familiar setting to facilitate people being relaxed. There's a few guides there, preferably who've been through something like that themselves and are, you know, have maybe experience of the sciences as well, and sort of like, that kind of are there present just to sort of like, help encourage people if they're maybe going on track, or if they want a bit of reassurance. For the first few hours, people are essentially sitting down with eye shades, I think, much like the clinical study, listening to music. And they've obviously been primed, as I mentioned, but they've also been kind of instructed to kind of turn off your analytical mind. That obviously all those faculties will return, but sort of push that to the back and just allow it to unfold as it will. And then after about 3 hours in, I think, once people have reached cruising altitude, they are then sort of like gently nudged into sort of maybe starting to look at their creative tasks. They've got things to sketch and draw and write with. They're encouraged to look into their problem alone, but also, interestingly, they can talk to the other scientists present as well in small groups. And that's quite interesting as well, when you're in that kind of open state, talking to someone who's sort of got an outsider's perspective. It could sort of bring new insights to the fore. So I feel like it's a rich area that deserves more attention. I know that there is modern research that has recently been done, and papers submitted on this. So I'm quite intrigued what a kind of a modern, slightly more rigorous modern study will find, actually.
Yeah, and I know kind of like the resurgence of this kind of started to come a little bit with microdosing. I know like a few years ago there was a lot of articles coming out microdosing in the tech world, and I wonder, any thoughts on that? Like, I know there's a lot of critique around like, oh, why would you need to do this for innovation or productivity, and kind of bashing kind of the capitalistic model of productivity. And
there is that. Some people, they kind of make the pretty valid point. Back in the 60s or whatever, LSD was like countercultural dynamite, and like now people are taking it in tiny doses to potentially increase their productivity in the workspace and be good capitalist cogs in the machine. So I can see the kind of the slight trepidation that some people might have. But I kind of actually referenced as an interesting article by Wired that looked at this, and it sort of reported that mathematicians and scientists were using low doses of microdoses of psychedelics, and they said it could enhance kind of lateral thinking, abstract thinking, and also facilitated access to flow states. And that's quite important as well, because states of flow tend to be associated with highly creative people, and it made these states more accessible. Now, the science on microdosing is kind of a mixed bag. Like it seems to be, well, from what I've read, it seems to be some people are reporting there's effects on BDNF and certain things, when others are like, no, essentially it's a placebo effect. It's people thinking they're gaining benefit through doing it because and it's like, well, so I don't know what the underlying mechanism is. I don't know if it's just a placebo effect, but if people seem to be sort of or claim to be gaining benefit from it, then that's interesting. Particularly
that makes me question just around microdosing and what people are calling a microdose, and could some people be taking that dose between a threshold and a museum dose, right? Or are they having that effect where they're kind of a little bit looser, and they are having kind of changes in their cognition. So it makes me wonder just around the colloquial term of microdosing.
That's a good point as well. Like, we don't this is just people claiming they're using smallish doses, but we've got no idea what those doses are, and it could definitely be veering into museum or mini dose territory potentially, which
but this idea of
sorry,
you can finish up.
I was just going to say, as we can see from the Harman Fadiman study, potentially like a little psychedelic goes quite a long way here. So I think 200 milligrams of mescaline is about roughly equivalent to 50 micrograms of LSD, which,
Okay.
so it's sort of like enough to definitely, like, feel it or whatever, but it's not sort of like mind-meltingly strong by any means.
Yeah. The one thing I was gonna say is, non-ordinary states for creativity, and it makes me think. You brought up before we got started here was the usefulness of dream states for creativity, and being able to tap into those hypnagogic states. It makes me think around wasn't it Einstein that used to use that technique? He would hold a ball in his hand and enter into that hypnopompic state.
Oh yeah,
and then once he dropped the ball, it would.
Yeah, that was Thomas Edison.
Edison, okay.
And Salvador Dali uses similar technique as well. Obviously, yeah, he's more obviously an artist rather than a scientist/inventor. Yes, the kind of that's what I thought was maybe worth linking, because there's so much overlap really in the psychedelic dream and hypnagogic states. I mean, they're all like they're all like non-linear, non-logical, freely associative, unconstrained, fluid, dynamic states of consciousness. If we think that analytical thought is, I guess, the kind of almost the modus operandi of the scientist. It's rational, it's logical, it's linear. It occurs incrementally. It's very good at detecting errors. It's very good at sort of comparing new concepts or ideas against pre-existing ones to see if it's likely to sort of be to work. Whereas the more sort of intuitive, creative, primary process type thinking is more like what I just described, sort of with the dream state, hypnagogic state, psychedelic state. And some scientists have argued, as I do in this paper, that perhaps we've become a little bit over-reliant on analytical thinking. Like, I'm in no way shooting down the importance of analytical thinking. Like, it's absolutely essential. But perhaps this more slightly dynamic, free-flowing, unconstrained states of consciousness that you can access through these altered states, perhaps they've got a place. I mean, certainly there has been some important scientific insights and breakthroughs that have occurred through these states. So inferring from that, it seems that psychedelics could be useful tools. And obviously, the dream state and the hypnagogic state, they can sometimes be quite hard to recall. You can get amnesia are associated with both, whereas a psychedelic, particularly a low dose, it tends to be, as Fadiman found in his work, it's quite easy for people to recall what they experienced. And also, the hypnagogic state is quite fleeting, like hence Edison, had to hold the balls and then drop the balls, and then you're hovering that sort of line between wake and sleep, and the dream state as well. You can definitely work with it, cultivate it, but it can take a bit of practice and sort of use of techniques to bring stuff back. Whereas with the psychedelic state, you've kind of got access to sort of an altered state experience that's sort of longer lasting and kind of more sustained in some respects, less fleeting. So it could be kind of quite a fertile terrain for generating new insights and ideas and perspectives.
Yeah, it is hard to kind of hang out in that. I'm not a morning person because of that. Once I start to become aware, I tend to go back and forth. Like, I'll wake up, I'm like, I gotta go back in there and do more work or continue this narrative. And it is tough, and not really productive for being a morning person wanting to hang out in that dream world for most of the morning. Yeah,
no, I know what you mean. Definitely not a natural morning person either.
Yeah. Cool. I see that we probably have a little under 10 minutes or so. So another question here that we're kind of sticking with this series is, what's the most vital teaching point that psychedelic practitioners need to become skilled and expert in? And then any thoughts around that?
So, I mean, I guess it's quite a similar answer to the question, the question before. Actually, it's very much kind of related to that. But I feel like probably something to do with kind of the integration of psychedelic experiences. I feel like we don't really. There's not that much known sort of really at this stage about how to kind of maximize the benefits in terms of people like, bringing those insights back and sort of like integrating them into their life and acting on them. And that's something that I feel like, needs more attention and is really important for, and I hope we can kind of like advance there. It seems like I'm a bit wary of like, if these things are used clinically, like there'll be a bit of because it's like the cheapest option, there'll be kind of a revolving door type scenario where people, they have a little bit of prep, they're dosed and then kind of sent back out into the world, and they might have a bit of a boost in certain aspects, although psychedelics can open you up and make you more raw and sort of open and vulnerable potentially as well. So the benefits might not be sustained for that long unless more attention is given over to integration. I feel like, and I know that word's kind of like bandied around quite a bit and sort of, but it's like, and it can mean different things to different people, but I mean, it can be different things to different people in how it's
right.
So, but I feel like, I feel like that's probably, speaking to kind of therapist friends like Dr. Ros Watts, who's and I feel like she would probably kind of hopefully concur with that there needs to be more thought on sort of how to kind of integrate these experiences, bring good stuff back, and then sort of like how to act on those insights for your betterment and the better.
Do you have any, I guess, like ideas around that, if you have been doing some thinking about this? Like, what does integration mean to you, and how does one integrate their experience?
I guess to me, integration to me would essentially boil down to like, if you have a psychedelic experience and you have insights about your life and areas of your life that could do with a bit of work or attention, how do you actively act on those insights to sort of like kind of instill them into your life and then act on them and live a life kind of aligned to those insights? And obviously, I'm not saying all psychedelic insights are necessarily positive or valid by default, but but some, there are definitely like important insights that can be gleaned from these experiences that can potentially enrich people's lives. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to like cast judgment on anyone. Like, I don't know people's inner workings, and we've all got our own, I guess, traumas and our own life issues and stories. But I feel like in some instances people can kind of keep coming back to psychedelics, and it's almost like there's not really they're not really kind of taking anything on board. They're not really seeming to integrate that much. They're not really like, it's not really adding much to their lives beyond the kind of the experience itself, which seems almost like a bit of a wasted opportunity. So right. I guess, and I've kind of made the case for, well, we know that psychedelics can open people up to nature, to the wonders of nature. So like perhaps doing some kind of, like Ros had the idea of, potential integration, nature-based integration practices. So prior to sort of like people going into an experience, you could maybe like tend a bit of soil. So like tending, almost like you're preparing your psychic soil before going into experience, and then plant a seed that you then take away, and you nurture this young plant as you're hopefully nurturing and grounding the insights in yourself and nourishing them. So certain, supplementary kind of nature-based things like that. I mean, potentially. I mean, this is maybe me more speaking as an ecologist, but if people are becoming more connected to nature and sort of inspired by that, then perhaps the potential for kind of linking people up with, I don't know, local volunteer groups who are like doing tree planting and ecological restoration. And, we know that like being in nature is very good for us. I mean, there's been very little research on it, but I suspect actually restoring, repairing, enhancing nature is possibly could be a step up in its mental health benefits. You tend to do these things in groups, so there's the social connectedness aspect of that. So I don't know. There are so many different ways potentially that you can kind of I don't know, help people sort of navigate the post-psychedelic experience in a way that could be beneficial to them as an individual and then the wider community / biosphere, potentially.
Yeah. I know we didn't get to touch too much on mystical experiences, but when I think about integration and just like, I guess this kind of falls within like the mystical, spiritual orientation of things, but life purpose, right? And I wonder, like, I guess sometimes people feel like that might be a little woo-woo of like, what's your life purpose? What are you doing here on life? But, that is sometimes like a really big thing that comes to people within their psychedelic experiences of how am I showing up here? How am I going to like devote my time to whatever I'm doing here on Earth? And I think the hard thing is actually trying to step into that. And there might be kind of like those societal or cultural influences that stop you from doing that. Like, hey, I want to plant trees and take care of it, but oh wow, that doesn't really pay well. Why would I step away from like a corporate gig that pays me well with insurance? But wow, my life purpose or calling, I really want to be oriented towards doing something good for my community.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I don't know. I don't think it is potentially woo-woo at all. I feel like life, like meaning and purpose are it's certainly very important to me. That's really important to me actually. Like it's one of my key driving kind of motivators. I guess. I mean, I would be I'm very grateful for that as well. But no, this is a common experience, like also reported by people who've had near-death experiences when they tend to come back from those, from the overview effect, as well as this kind of renewed or enhanced sense of life purpose and meaning. People come back and it feels like they've got a mission, and obviously that, and oftentimes that tends to sort of revolve around being of service in some way, being of service to people, being of service to sort of to nature in some way. But it's tough, because we live in this. You have this amazing experience of like of peace and unconditional love and unity and connecting to the cosmos, and then you come back, that all it folds in back on itself, and you come back and then find yourself, you're back where you started in this society that doesn't particularly like measure itself by those values and has quite different values, and values actually that kind of sort of go against that. And it's like, so there's this kind of disconnect between sort of like your sort of purpose and meaning and sort of, I guess, the kind of the purpose and meaning that society at large thinks that you should essentially be working towards. And so that can be tough, because we do need to be like, we live in a capitalist society. We do need to be financially empowered and independent and stuff. But I feel like in some respects there's maybe compromise to be made. Like I would personally rather work in something that gives me meaning and purpose, and I feel like I'm making a positive difference or impact in some way. And as long as I can earn a living, so I'm self-sufficient and independent, I'm happy. I don't need like really big bucks and a really big house and a really shiny car, like that sort of is slightly less important, and maybe that opinion and view is an entitled, privileged opinion to hold, and it might well be. I'm very lucky to have it's a lottery of where you're born and end up growing up and all this stuff. And I guess some people have no choice but to work to earn a living and survive. Many people, and I get that, and I'm certainly not in no way, attacking any of those people at all. Just make that clear. But I guess because I've been born into a position where I do have some choice and flexibility about how I spend my lifetime. So because I've got that choice, I want to sort of act on it.
Yeah. It's hard to do, but I think it's important. Like, how are we measuring success? Is it the material wealth that we have, or is it our happiness? And I tend to come back to my happiness, and I'm able to, give up not going out as much for, simplicity's sake, right? It's like, I value that. I mean, for this project, for example, like, this has definitely been a huge integration project for me. I think really started with a holotropic breathwork session I had around teaching. That manifested into creating a college class and then teaching psychedelics within the college for 2 semesters. And then once that ended, it kind of shifted into here. Thankfully I've had a safety net to be able to, pursue this project when it hasn't been making any money. But it's around like the happiness and meaning. It's like, wait, like every time I try to get away from it, it draws me back. And I'm like, I could be doing other things, but there seems to be this thing here where it's like, but this is where I want to spend my time.
Well, no, that's really cool. And I mean, that's the other thing. We don't, our primary, I guess, way of earning a living, our main job, so for some people that will take up all their time, particularly if they've got family obligations and other stuff going on. But our job or our kind of role, doesn't have to define us either. Like, we can pursue other projects and we can volunteer and there's many different side options available. I feel like, so you don't have to completely revamp and change your life in a drastic way, but you could maybe start just making a few little alterations in how you spend your time.
That's a great point, right? It's like the balance there. It's like, okay, here's the thing that provides the income, so I can maybe pursue a side job or create a creative project that then nourishes that like kind of soul purpose and your meaning. Well, this has been fun. We're at the hour, so I want to respect your time. Sam, anything that you want to close with for today?
No, I don't think so. In particular, I think I've enjoyed our chat. So thanks.
Yeah, it's always fun chatting with you. I
likewise.
Appreciate it.
Kyle.
Do you have a social media presence or website if people want to learn more about you?
Sort of not really. I'm on Facebook, but that's kind of personal. Twitter is good. That's kind of like I'm just out there. LinkedIn a bit. That's kind of it, really. I've been told I should probably get an actual website going up. It's kind of on the to-do list, but there's been a lot of things on the to-do list of late. So at some point, I might get a.
It's hard to balance it all. Yeah, it's not a top priority.
Yeah.
But, well, cool, Sam. I'm really excited, and also being part of Vital, so we'll be able to dig in more with this conversation around integration and nature connectedness. So really excited to have you part of the faculty here at Vital. Excited for people to be part of it.
Oh, well, thank you. No, it's great to be on board. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for tuning and listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. So have a great day.